Hello, ladies and gentlemen. MSI is upon us, and it's time for the MSI content run. We start with, of course, the tier list, but I want to preface this by saying I have watched all, of course, of the LPL, LCK, LTA, and LEC. So I've watched all the competition. I haven't watched too much of course, CFO's run or Gigabyte Marine's run, or even, the Brazilian team's run. So I am going to give a shout out to certain players, but I'm not going to put them in the tier list. Forgive me, I don't think it would be right because I'm operating with so much more information when it comes to the other players. Obviously, I am a person that has worked with League now for 15 years and I've watched, an abundance of League. I wouldn't be surprised if I am one of the people that has watched, the most League in the entire damn universe because I spent, my whole life dedicated to this game. So hopefully this tier list will come out as useful and good. Otherwise, what a waste of time. With that being said, obviously there's going to be biases. There's certain things, certain elements that I really care about that I think are important for the game, and I am going to, of course, contextualize this list in terms of how I believe they're going to perform at this MSI in particular. The details that I pay attention to is how did you qualify, your performance in those qualifications, mechanical ceilings, mechanical play, clutchness in past, big games and also in past competition, your experience in terms of past competition, and of course, once again, how that ties into the current state of the meta, which I believe is going to be largely similar coming into MSI. Usually, Riot is very, very careful with changing the game up too much between Spring and of course MSI, so I imagine it's going to be very similar, where like isolated top lanes are going to thrive because of the swapping game that is very active, winning bot lanes that provide you initiative on dragons, mid-jungle pairings that need to be paired depending on where, of course, the fearless draft goes. So a lot of AD junglers and how deep your pool goes there is super important, whether it's Zinzao, Trundle, Pantheon, Nafiri, Lee Sin, Nocturne, Jarvan, the champion that is going to be correct to pick is often going to be very specific depending on what your mid laner needs to pick too, because it's also, like a staircase in terms of what the mid meta is. It's like Talia over Azir, over Ryze, over Ahri, over Sylas, over Akali, and then you can squeeze in a Galio in there. You can play more mages if your comp needs it. The point I'm making is that you can go in many directions in terms of what you want to play. With, of course, the occasional Sejuani or Maokai, or if you're feeling spicy, maybe a little, Fiddlesticks or Ivan, if your name is inspired, of course. So I'm of course, basing this tier list off of these things in mind. But I think it is time to begin. Top lane, top lane, top lane, top lane. Without Zeus, it does get a little bit weird, but I think that's kind of telling. I do think that Doran managed to do something very special with T1 in the sense that, the solution to T1's problem in regards to how they deal with how, of course, their bot lane likes to play the game. Everyone always thought it's like, oh, with Doran, I also thought the same. I also thought, oh, they're going to lack a carry who's going to, carry the boats and the logs because there's a lot of, role players. It's like T1 functioned so well because they were the best at what they did and together it worked in the past years, right? And in the context of now, it was always a question of, is Gumayushi going to pick up the slack, or is, because Doran is not that type of a player, he plays isolated. But when it comes to their playoff run, especially in the series against Hanwha Life, you could see that Doran was very, very capable of playing carries, which is surprising because I believe currently the meta, if we look at most teams, isolated top laners have been thriving. So, the name that I want to put on top of the list, which might be controversial, but I get it, is going to be Flandre. I think the biggest criticism towards Flandre that you can levy towards him is that if he plays the carry matchups, he's going to be worse than most top laners at this tournament coming out of the Eastern teams, whether it's Bin, Keen, even Doran. But I think in the context of playing the isolated role and really, really setting up his jungle and support for success, I do think that he offers the most amount of consistency, the most amount of stability. I think this year has been a fantastic year for Flandre. I think that he has done super, super much to shape the meta. He was the first one to bring out the Jace tank. He was one of the first to really, really push the Sion blind. He was also one of the early ones to play the Yorick, if not the first on all three that I mentioned. And I think that Flandre is a very, very strong player in terms of playing in isolation. I think he's very, very tough to break. I think that he's very, very good at cheating waves, has a good rumble too. I think that right now, in the current niche of what I think top lane should be, I do think that he performs super, super good. But I think if he is put into a carry versus carry matchup, like let's say he blind picks Ambessa and then Bin counters with Camille, I think that's going to be a losing factor in the game. So obviously there is a certain challenge there. And maybe as I'm talking, maybe I'm going to move the list around, because in the end, I am, of course, just doing this real time. This is one take type of thing. I'm pouring on my thoughts. So bear with me if things change, because I'm going to, you know, make my thoughts come to life and put them, you know, into noise, into this microphone. And then maybe I'll convince myself in the process. The next one I wanted to put for the similar reasons, Keane. Even though I don't think Keane had the most consistent splits, because usually that's what he's known for, I do think that Keane offers a very, very wide range of play. I think that when he plays his classic, whether it's a Keane Sante, I do think that Keane is a very, very good player at always being super, super stable. I would trust Keane more to be, of course, in the context of playing the carry versus carry matchups if they come up in a fearless situation. I would trust Keane a little bit more than Flandre. So there's a world where I just move Keane up here and then maybe we change things up, because I do think that Keane covers a wider range of play over Flandre, and I think that Flandre could be a potential weak point in those contexts. But I do think that there's only one top laner really that would be capable of punishing Flandre in that context, and that's why I'm unsure. But bear with me, we continue. The next one in line for me is Bin. Bin probably had one of the worst individual splits with all the turmoil that Bilibili has gone through. They still managed to, of course, make the final, lose to anyone's legend. I do think that Bin has a great Yorick. I do think there are certain champions like the Renekton or the Gnar or even the Gwen. When you know he's going to be playing Camille or Gwen in the right matchups, you know he's going to just 1v9 the game. And that is the context of Bilibili right now. It's like there's certain contexts where it's like, oh, Elk is playing Lucian with Nami in a good matchup, oh, they're going to be able to dominate the game. Or Bin is playing Camille into Ambessa and he has a Sejuani jungle, he's going to carry the game. Or he's playing Gwen in a fine matchup, he's going to just carry the game. In the context of Bilibili, that's where they are at. They are like individually strong players, individually good players. And I think the main thing is that I think it's very hard to elevate Bin's greatest strengths. I am not a big fan of when Bin plays Ambessa. I'm not a big fan of when Bin plays Rumble. I do think that the top laners above him, especially in the Rumble case, just do better, because I do think that there are certain champions that require a better level of team play to leverage to the max. Bin is a strong laner, amazing team fighter, but in the in-between, I do think that's where Bilibili lack, because in the end, I think this also reflects on how I'm going to evaluate the players. The next one in line is Doran. I do think that Doran had a fantastic playoff weekend. I do think that there's certain things that you hope that he carries over. I think his best series here, MVP worthy. I hope he got MVP, because I didn't check who did for the Hanwha Live series. I think he had a fantastic series where he played, you know, carry champions and actually like delivered super, super hard. There are certain elements of Doran's history, especially in internationals, that become a little bit scarier. I do think that when it comes to the LCK, I think he's completely underappreciated, because I read some posts about how, oh, now finally T1 figured out how to utilize Doran. While Doran has like won multiple championships on different teams, Doran has had a very, very storied career, very, very impressive career in the context of the LCK. The criticisms toward Doran always was that, oh, he isn't as good as maybe like a Keane or a Zeus. But now, coming into this tournament, especially after that performance against Hanwha Life, I do think that Doran is looking damn good. I do think that Doran is like the bar to set. I think that Doran is very, very good at playing isolated League of Legends and showed a good range. But it's hard to shake off, you know, the entirety of the split and a lot of those underperformances, like against BFX or against Bro, and some of the other games too, where I think also in the context of the international performances, I do think that in terms of what we've seen in regards to the other players, they just bring constantly a very, very high level to those competitions. And it will be very interesting to see T1 Doran. Will he get, you know, the international T1 buff on this team? because in the context of T1, why, in my opinion, why they do so well at international events is because the pressure is something they manage super well because they're constantly under that pressure. They manage the logistics a lot better, and the pressure of the schedule, because you get to practice a lot less. You have to do media, you have to travel. Even though MSI is a lighter tournament because it all happens in the same venue, same place, Canada, I do think that this is, a potential, competitive edge even here. So I'm excited to see T1 Doran, break these, windows and shatter them and make it through. I think that could be, splendid. I think that could be super, super exciting. We continue. The next person in line in regards to who we have left is just the Westerners. I do think that in regards to the players, I would have to put Broken Blade here. I do think that Broken Blade as a player hasn't had an impressive split. I do think that G2 thrive when, of course, Broken Blade and Caps play well. I want to reference back to when they beat Koi in the first upper bracket final. When they had that weekend, I do think that Broken Blade showed a very, very wide range of play. And I do think that if we only look at the finals, G2 looks like a terrible team. And I think that's true for two finals because they just got smoked back-to-back, right? And even in that game 4, where Caps was very criticized for his Orianna play, running into that Leona, rightfully so. I do think that Broken Blade on Dr. Mundo also had a very rough one when Miriam and Solo killed him on Kesanta after BB had a very good start to the game. There's very, very clear criticism to push towards BB, but I do think that his international performances really, really matter. I think that he's been very solid internationally in recent times, and I do think that there were moments where G2 looked good, and I do think that Broken Blade took a very important part in that. I think that he plays the tank super well. I think he's very important in how G2 structured the macro game, and I do think that he has, certain niche counter picks that can work super well. I think it's also important, in the context of the rest of the guys. Bwipo, I'm a big fan of Bwipo. I love Bwipo. I think Bwipo as a player had one of the weaker individual performances. I do think in terms of some of the risk and, the problems that they faced in some of the C9 series was the inconsistency of Bwipo and also Busio. I do think that Bwipo as a player, also internationally, is a goddamn demon. He's really, really good and plays fearless and plays with a level of confidence and understands how to win games, and nameplates are never going to shine bright enough for him to be blind. I do think that Bwipo as a individual in this split, I was very surprised that Thanatos didn't get All-Pro. I thought Thanatos even put up a borderline like MVP performance, and I was very surprised that Bwipo made it to the #1 All-Pro. I didn't think it made too much sense. I do think that Bwipo is a very, very, he's a wild card. It's like in that series against C9, I pointed to some of the mistakes he did where he overreached with, for example, Cho'Gath and, got killed time and time again. But in those same games, he also finds super, super good angles, steals waves, and finds opportunities. He's very relentless in his approach. He is, the embodiment of, Hilly in top lane in many ways. And I do think that Bwipo is a player that understands how to prepare for international super, super well. This is, if you just look at the players that are in the top lane role, this is just a wealth of experience. Midwin, I do think, being 7th here is not an insult. It really, really isn't. It's just a question of the experience that everybody has above you. I think the Midwin split was damn good. I think that he has a range of play. I think he's important to Koi's success. But, I do think that Koi is coming into this tournament as a team that is greater than the sum of their parts. I do think that Koi's teamwork and team play is what is going to, potentially give them an edge against some of the other Western teams and maybe give them some upset potential. But I do think that, Midwin belongs here 7th behind, all of these very, very experienced top laners that are bringing something very unique to the table. Midwin will have to break through. I do think that it's good to highlight Midwin's capacity of playing tanks, capacity of playing the carries, and I think that he plays well in isolation, which I, of course, valued hard. I'm going to take one more last look here. Am I happy with the listing here? Is this something that I would change? Honestly, even though Keen didn't have the best performance, I do think that Keen is a rock. And I think Flandre is the same way. And I think there are worlds where Bin can break Flandre, but he's going to have a harder time breaking Keen. And I think that matters when I think about the head-to-heads that are going to happen. So this is the perfect time for us to move to, of course, the jungle role. Are you still with me? Are you angry? Are you already writing a comment? I remind you, this is my biased tier list, and this is my expectation for how I believe the players are going to perform. And I don't hold the crystal ball, so who knows what's going to happen. This is all for the fun of the game. So if I got you angry, perfect. It's a passion that we love. You know, everyone engages with their entertainment product however they want. Jungle, I believe, is the most stacked role by far at this tournament. The #1 seed junglers that have come out of every region, Canyon, Tarzan, Inspired, Elioya, even Junjia. This is a fantastic pool of junglers. And rating them, you know, it's tricky, but let's break it down. I'm going to put Canyon first. I'm going to put Canyon first. In my mind, Canyon had one of the best individual splits ever. For the majority of the last couple of years, Canyon has pretty much phoned it in during regular split and then kind of kicks it into gear when playoffs happen, and then he just brings out, you know, clutch Canyon that is willing to step up to the plate, willing to pivot to Kha'Zix in the middle of a series, willing to pivot to Katos in the middle of a series, find Skarner ultimates that are absolutely crazy, steals on steals on steals, and, you know, just really, really eye of the tiger. I think Canyon as a jungler is insanely complete. I think it's very hard to point to a flaw right now. Even in the series that they played against Hawa Life, I thought he was absolutely demonic. There was a moment where he got caught on Zinza, right? And maybe game 1 wasn't the strongest, but I do think as the series continued, like when backs were against the wall and they were 2-0 down, I think in game 3, 4, 5, he was absolutely insane. And I think Canyon, if you look at some of the competitors here, especially like Owner, if you look at the matchups between Owner and Canyon, I feel like those are the only times Owner looked deflated as a player. If you look back at that series where, T1 were in very, very good spots, great spots to beat Genji, but they just didn't manage to do so, I think it was off the hand of brilliant, brilliant objective steals from Canyon, and also Genji just having insanely accurate team fighting. So I think Canyon is at the spearhead of that. I think the context of why, in my opinion, why Genji comes into this tournament as a big favorite is because Canyon and Chovy just look like they are in their prime somehow. After the crazy good careers they've had, Canyon and Chovy just look absolutely brilliant as players. And I think Canyon is a very important factor behind that. The next player here, this is where it gets tricky, because I do think that two are interchangeable. It's a question of your flavor. Because I do think Tarzan, as a individual, I think you couldn't have demanded more. For me, is the MVP of the LPL. I think that Tarzan was absolutely brilliant through and through. Brilliant range of play, mechanic play, absolutely insane. Pulls out the first time Zed on stage and just obviously just massacres first time in the context of him picking it in competitive. At the time, he plays the tanks, he plays the carries, and I think anyone's Legends, their success as a team, as a well-oiled engine, I think they come into this tournament as the most cohesive team. I think individually they are going to be weaker in some departments, but in terms of the cohesion and how they drive the game with mid and jungle, I think Tarzan and Kael is probably the strongest mid-jungle duo, jungle super duo at this competition. And I think that anyone's Legend success is based off of how damn good Tarzan and Kael are. And, the main point people are going to bring up is like, oh, Tarzan at internationals, whatever. It's like, first and foremost, he hasn't been at that many internationals. Which, you can say that as a knock or not, but I have watched Tarzan his entire career. I have watched him, play regionally, and he has consistently been minimum a top 3 jungler in his region, in regions that have a crazy, crazy jungle pool consistently. I think that Tarzan is an extremely underrated player, and before this LPL split, in my opinion, was the greatest player who have not won a title yet. And now he has, and he has done it in a way that was just simply amazing. I think Tarzan, if the criticism towards him is, I think now MSI, the lights are going to be too bright, it's going to be tough for him. I can see that world, and then obviously Owner would be able to perform better. But I do think that Owner, while I am very happy that he has built additional skill sets together with Keria. I would highlight that the signing of Mata, obviously I'm speculating here, but Mata has had a hand in some of the greatest jungle support synergy duos in the league, and now he joined over to T1, and Keria and Owner are working together better than ever. For the longest time, T1's macro was a lot. It's like Owner gets to keep power farming regardless of what he plays. He was super, super strong coming into fights, whether it was Rel, Sejuani, or even Vi, champions that you don't associate necessarily with farming. He was very, very, ahead of the curve on these champs because he performed so good in fights. And then Keria played high mobility supports like the likes of Pyke, Rakan, Bar to be able to put the vision down and escape without, of course, pulling jungle attention. And that's why often, while individually Keria was really good at melee supports, they had a hard time piecing it together because the jungle support synergy wasn't there. So they compensated by playing mobility support so Owner can, of course, play his style. But this split, I feel like they have really, really added layers to their gameplay. And I think that's insane. Because I do think that Owner, while he has lost some of his, clutch edge, which is even painful to say because it was only against Cannon in particular, I do think that Keria and Owner are actually like giga evolving to the point where they're getting super, super scary. And I think there's a world where, as a duo, that coming into like later into the season, coming into maybe World Champions, even MSI, are actually going to be like giga impactful. But here, if someone told me Owner second because of Tarzan's international experience, I could maybe buy that, but I have to, give props to Tarzan and his range. And I think that there was, some moments, some regular split games that maybe, anyone's legend dropped the ball. But in the grand scheme of things, LPL playoff in terms of the format, these teams played 4 best of 5s. Basically, Tarzan played 4 best of 5s to win. The bracket for the LPL was way better to push teams, to test teams, because obviously Gen.G is coming into this competition only playing 1 BO5, and T1 didn't get to play a finals. There's a lot of awkwardness and a lot of shittiness when it comes to the LCK format, which I think is important to highlight. But to be fair, T1 also got pushed, right, because they had to beat KT, and then they had to beat How Alive, which of course matters. But it's far less than some of the, LPL teams. I say some, but there's 2 of them, right? So there's that. Owner is going to be my 3rd. My 4th is actually going to be a Western player, Inspired. Inspired, I think that he is basically, the Western version of what Tarzan represents in the LPL, what Canyon represents in the LCK. I think that he is insanely complete. I think that the main thing that I had as a potential criticism towards him in the past was that he was maybe too calculated, but that is like grasping at straws, because it's very clear that Inspired also, when the game is in, a bad state, that he's capable of elevating risk. I think in terms of like breaking games, level 1, 2, 3, I think this is something that Canyon, Tarzan, and Inspired are just masters of, and something I would love to see more of Owner, because in terms of what jungle can do, level 1, 2, 3, breaking patterns, being there to invade chickens, finding level 2 ganks, 3 ganks, finding split maps, finding invades, playing around vision in the early game, I do think this is something that, the 3 of them do super well. Owner does sometimes, but I want to see more of that from Owner. And I think the Inspired, it just comes into this tournament as a player that can just compete in a role that is so insanely stacked. And I think Inspired belongs here. Obviously, it's hard to measure how good Inspired is in terms of, the competition and so forth. But, because the 3 jungles above him have managed to do this already for a whole split against some of the best of the best. So Inspired is 4th for me. Next one in line is Elioya. I think he is the core reason, in my opinion, why Koi is so competitive. I think that Koi is very similar to how I view anyone's legend coming into this competition, but a baby version of it. I do think that their team cohesion is super, super good, and I think that Alvaro and Elioya played together insanely well. I think the main thing for me is that Elioya, if it comes to like the deeper champion pool, I wonder how he's going to fare when it comes to like picking champions in a deeper BO5. I wonder how that's going to pan out, because I don't see Elioya as like an insanely good mechanical jungler right now. I see him as a very, very intelligent and smart jungler that drives the game and makes the game, a picture of his own vision, which I think deserves a lot of props, And I think Elioya here, 5th, the players above him are some of the best players to ever touch the role. And I think Elioya, in terms of his impact in European League of Legends, Elioya's career has been absolutely fantastic. We have mentioned, the international results for some of the other players here. Elioya, his times with Mad Lions, even though his results have been really bad, I don't feel like it's correct to put that solely on him, because in the end, 2021, when Mad Lions made their runs where they took Diamond to 5 games, and they had that run at Worlds where they made quarters, I do think Elioya performed super good, and I think even in the losses, I think he was fine. There was like that play-ins, I remember, where the only weapon they had really was Belveth, and Elioya had to carry with Belveth, but when he ran out of champions to carry with, he just didn't really have an impact. But Elioya, he carries the burden of the 16-minute loss against T1, but it's wrong to just blame Elioya for that. So I think he's going to be all right, but I do believe the jungles above him are going to be better. Next in line, I'm going to put Beishwan. I think Beishwan, I do think there's going to be people who say, well, look how much better Billy got when Beishwan. Yeah, but we're watching the games, watching the individuals. Something that I wish the community understood is that to be a neutral player in a high-level game is already very difficult. Meaning, there's a lot of players that are going to lose you the game. And when it comes to playing like a top 3 matchup, or like, let's say we are watching How Live versus T1, it's like one player underperforming, making a harsh mistake, can just destroy the whole game. And being a player that is neutral and doesn't lose you the game is already something insanely difficult. Wei was a player that cracked under pressure. I don't know what was going on with him, but he was like solo losing game states. He was getting caught before objectives. Engages were really, like, he was kind of like, in terms of what went down with Umti and Team Liquid, Wei was very similar in the LPL. Very, very similar. And I think that Beishwan has eased into the role, but I don't think he's anything special. I think that Billy hired him because Beishwan and TT beat them in a BO5. And I think Beishwan is definitely an upgrade over Wei, but I don't think that he's the sole reason as to why this team is doing better. I just think that for the majority of games, he is a positive. But when you see him jungle against someone like Tarzan, you can see the clear jungle gap, because it's very evident that Beishwan just gets kind of pulled around by his team and he gets told what to do. And I think if that's the case, you're going to lose a lot of precision. But I do think that he's serviceable. And next in line here is Skumond. Skumond heading into the first international. Same thing as Beishwan. I think that Skumond as a player, I think he's very good when he's ahead. And I think that getting ahead against this pool of players is going to be insanely difficult. I think that his playstyle is going to be insanely hard to reenact here at the world stage. And I hope that G2 really hammer home the jungle support synergy, because there were glimpses of that, especially in those 2 best-of-5s that they won leading into the finals, where they did good things together. If they manage to master that and do better in that department, I would be excited about G2's run. But Skumon coming into his first international, I do hope that he sticks to his guns and does what, of course, makes sense in the sense of, him as a player. But I do think that Skumond is playing against a very tough pool. I would even put Junjia above him. And I think even the Brazil jungler in Tattoo. We also have Levi, right, for Gigabyte Marines. This is a very experienced pool. And I think Tattoo, like, I watched the finals, and Tattoo was by far the biggest, the most impressive player for me when it comes to Furia. So I just wanted to give a shout out to him. But Skumon's going to be my 7th guy here. And I think it's a perfect segue now to the mid lane pool. The mid lane pool, Chovy, very easy. We start to recognize the pattern. There's a lot of Gen G players at the top. I think that Canyon and Chovy, for me, is non-negotiable. Keen could maybe move around, but Chovy, I think he's undisputed the best player coming into this tournament. I think that, you know, this is one of those MSIs where I think that if Genji don't win, it's going to be giga disappointing, like insanely disappointing. There's a world and a scenario where, you know, T1 could beat them. Like that would be almost poetic because we didn't get the finals and then they upset them somehow, but you need to be able to do that twice. There's a double elimination bracket, and beating Genji twice sounds insanely difficult. The main criticism towards Genji right now is like ruler kind of shaky. Genji, you know, in terms of drafting, also, you know, if there's a team that drafts like kind of bad, I would say that it would be like Genji, but they just get away with it because they are Genji, and there's certain elements, certain drafts they play that are very smart, but those are drafts that only Genji could play. So like that fucking Lee Sin, Senna, Twisted Fate, Cho'Gath draft, like that was, you know, very nice. But at the same time, if I saw other teams play this, I was like, ooh, you're not going to be able to, you know, play with that level of spacing and finding poke and positioning and so forth. But nevertheless, Chovy, he's just, in terms of peak, I think Chovy has the highest peak of any player. He is the best player of all time. Chovy the GOAT. I mean, Faker the GOAT. Sorry, Faker the GOAT. Chovy the BOAT. Chovy came into the previous MSI off of a insane playoff performance where he played mostly Azir and carried against the likes of Hanwha Life and also the gruesome series against T1 that went to 5 games. As remember, one of the best LCK finals of all time. Chovy this year too. I got best of 5 against Hanwha Life, bro. What else do you need to say? Chovy has just been a force the entire split, and I hope, you know, that he gets a trophy to cement how good this split was, because the lack of the LCK one is definitely disappointing. But Chovy, to me, comes in as the best player. The next people in line, you know, the tricky thing here is when you have the names of Shanks, Knight, and of course Faker. Shanks, I think in terms of performance, has outperformed both. But there's a player that is going into the den of dragons at this international tournament. Last MSI, Shanks, you know, very similar to how Cream was in the last MSI. He came in, you know, and the lights were definitely shining too bright for him, right? I think that he's in a similar spot here where you can kind of choose your flavor of how you want to set this up. I think Shanks was insanely impressive, and he's had kind of a long career. There was a point in time where his team went like 0-16 or something when he was in WE, and I think that individually in this split, although the mid lane pool wasn't like the greatest, right? We had like Shanks, Knight, Rookie, occasionally Scout that were like performing good. Mid lane in the LPL isn't like, you know, the toughest thing to overcome. While in the LCK, you have like players like BDD, players like Calyx that just came through. Excuse me. You have, of course, Zeka. You have Showmaker. You know, you have a mid lane pool that really pushes you. Really pushes you. But Shanks, in terms of the individual performance, you know, the main thing for me here is, I would say, it's just a question of flavoring, you know? I do think that I have to put Knight above Faker. I do think that Faker was the weakest performer in the context of his team in the regular split. I do think that everyone stepped up. I think Faker had some good moments, like that Annie flash over the wall, and Faker is a player that's going to be super relentless. I don't think that he ever cracks, even though he makes like a mistake or two. You know, I do think like a player like BDD outperformed him. I think that Zeka was underperforming, and I think mid lane wasn't like a super important point in that series, but there's often where like Faker loses sums, dies to ganks, and doesn't have good condition in the game. And I think that his team around him really give him a lot to, of course, stabilize him. I understand some people are going to say, well, what about the intangibles? I'm sure T1 would be a lot worse if they had BDD over Faker. I'm sure. But measuring something like that is very difficult for all the other players involved. And I think that's a little bit like unfair in that context, because I'm sure Chovy is insanely important for Gen G too, even outside of the game, in regards to how he is as a player. But for me, always when it comes to Faker, I think it's just a question of how much time does he have off. Looking at Faker's previous years, it's very obvious that he's insanely plagued by his injury. Right? His injury, his arm pain, right? It's very, very clear. When he has to play over longer periods of time, this seems to be the periods where he's suffering the most. I think looking at the context of the last couple of years in terms of his performance, Summer Split is always the roughest one. Always the roughest one. At one point, it went all the way to benching, just because the Summer Split is tied into Spring Split, MSI, Summer Split, and it just never stops. And then couple of, a month preparation time for Worlds in most cases, and then Faker seems to be like up to speed. I wish the T1 had like a very suitable sub where they could let Faker rest, let's say the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks of a regular split, and then Faker gets his own time to, get up to speed, and then he gets to rock and roll. I feel like that kind of a solution would be insane, but obviously I understand that finding a mid laner that is suitable and at the same time, the revenue and the idea of not playing Faker can be dangerous, and I'm sure Faker as a player himself is probably, a complete addict to playing League of Legends on the big stage and performing and having that pressure on him. So I'm not saying like this is some kind of easy solution, because there's a lot of things to balance. But coming into this competition, I do think that I have to put the three homies in Knight, Shanks, Chovy ahead. And the tricky thing is like, sure, Faker can find very, very specific angles, but I do think that the unique thing about this competition now is that this is the first international where Faker plays fearless. And I do think the predictability of Faker, where he goes in terms of draft, is something that even the LCK teams really, really held to his neck, where he doesn't want to play Talia, prioritizes Azir, and then it divulges into Ahri, and then, of course, it divulges into Sylas. And I think that kind of a breakdown, while other teams also follow that, I do think that there is a wider range of counters that the other players can, throw in there. So I do think that this is something that is going to be, a challenge for Faker to deal with. But Faker, he loves challenges more than anybody, and I do think that he's a fierce competitor, and that's why I'm putting him fourth. Next one in line, I think Caps is kind of in the Faker boat too, in terms of like experience and clutch factor. I do think that Caps is just, the Western Faker. I do think that his, performance was not the greatest at times during the split, but I always reference back to that 2 best-of-5 wins that they had to qualify them to the finals. Caps was insane. Caps was damn good, really, really crazy good, and I do think that Caps just had that in him. He just has that in him, and Caps belongs here as number 5 for me. Next one in line, we have, of course, Quad and Jojo Pune to still, just throw in there. I do feel like they serve a very specific role for their team. I do think that Jojo Pune is more important for the overall identity, while Quad plays a more isolated mid style where he farms and sets himself up for success. I do think in the context of playing setup, I do think Jojo Pune would be better. Whether it's like something like Ahri or something like, let's say, Galio, I would prefer someone like Jojo Pune. But in terms of like some of the carries and, the majors, I do think that I would prefer Quad. And with where we are at in the current meta, I would probably lean slightly towards Quad. No knock on Jojo Pune. I just want to see just a little bit more depth from Jojo. Even though his playoff run, I think, was very, very good. I do think that I'm going to put Jojo Pune 7th here. All right, AD carry. AD carry is a very strange one too, because in terms of some of our favorite players, there has been underperformances. I think if I have to choose someone who played the best leading up to MSI, like the best out of any player, who is the best, who had the best ADC performance in spring, it would be Hope. Plain and simple. Hope would be the best performing ADC. But the likes of Ruler and Gumayusi, these guys are, you know, Gumayusi has been ramping up, and now the meta is finally in the perfect place for Gumayusi. No swap for grubs early, right? Lane phase, giga important. Lucian is back in action. Senna had one patch where she was useful, but now she got, you know, taken out the back again and shot in the head because Riot is like, yo, let's make farming Senna useful for one patch and then let's take it all away from people. You know, no continuity. It just, you know, Senna games were in production for one split, for one little, you know, segment of a patch, and then it just got, you know, removed instantaneous. In my mind, Ruler, you know, Ruler is probably the weakest performer on the team. Currently, but Ruler still, I think that there's many big games where he steps up to the plate. Ruler has kind of taken the role of how Canyon approached things in the past, where Canyon was chilling, had like weak games in regular split. They still won games, so he didn't really care. But then when playoffs kicked into gear, it's like, ooh, look at my man here stepping up to the plate. I think, like, for example, Viper performed better than Ruler in that best of 5 against HLE. I think Ruler still has that pedigree about him. He is definitely a player that can, you know, step up to the plate and compete and play at the highest level. For me, though, I have to put Gumayusi first. And I'm putting everything into context, right? I think the meta is in a very, very good place. I think T1 will be insanely competitive against everybody because of their bot lane. I think their bot lane phase, like Zyra Khan being super good, Lucian being super good, Varus being super good, Kalista got nerfed but still playable and pairable with a lot of the range supports. Gumayusi carry as a duo, I think, are just insanely dangerous. And I think they are the only, they are the main aspects for me that make them a potential, you know, dark horse to win the competition. I say dark horse because Gen.G just should be favorite above anyone. Anyone who tells you Gen.G is not the favorite are just crazy, right? They're just crazy. But we need to, of course, play with the angles of what would be a world where T1 actually win. And I do think it's through the likes of their bot lane. I think Gumayusi had a very, very steady ramp up. He had some disgusting games early on when the whole Smash drama and so forth. But when it became more settled in, and the Spirit Blossom patch landed, I feel like Gumayusi was one of the flowers that flourished. He really was. And I think that Gumayusi is in a just really good spot. I think if Viper was here, I would put him above everybody. Just to put that out there. And I repeat, I do think that Hope had the best spring split out of any of these players. But the pedigree and the international experience of these two players in particular, it's just it just swings too heavy here. It swings way too heavy. So Hope number 3. Next one in line is gonna be Elk. You know, Billy, they suffered, but it's Elk. You know, Elk still has that mechanical skill. Like there's highlight reels that I can still show you. It's just that I do think that Elk has suffered due to the circumstance of his team. And in a world where Elk and On are performing, like On in particular is performing better and better, you can see the same impact on Elk. Billy as a team, I do think that as individuals, they have the force to actually cause some upset wins here, just because individually they are talented enough to fight against anybody. And I do think that that's true for Elk too, but I do think that the consistency of Billy needs to be questioned here. And I do think that the homies above him, I'm going to rate a little bit higher, right? The same thing, the same argument you could say for Overruler and Gumayusi. You could put Elk up here, right, due to his experience. But I do think that, you know, leading into MSI, more recent games, you know, I'm looking at that as a point of comparison. I do think that I have to put him 4th here. You know, I have to put him 4th. I don't think that he didn't command enough attention, in my opinion, in the Billy wins. I thought that he was a bit of a passenger. And sometimes in ADC, that's perfectly fine. That's sometimes what your role is. But it's not going to be, you know, my vision of what I'm going to put higher and higher, you know, on this list. Okay. Next in line, I'm going to put Masu. I think that Masu is a player that has very good range of play. I don't necessarily pin anything on him that he's weak on. I think that he plays all champions, plays a very, very high level. I think that his most recent international performance was absolutely insane. Like, people talk about Genji versus FlyQuest and they say, wow, FlyQuest prepared so well. But I think Masu and Busio just gapped the shit out of Lehens and Pays. And I think that matters too. It's like, gameplay is king in the end. It's like, I can give you the best car in the world. And if you don't know how to drive, you know, it doesn't fucking matter. You know, you're not going to pick up any pace. And Masu did some driving. And I think in this split as well, I think that he was a rock. I think that he played well. I think AD carry is a role that is competitive. I think even like Sven played super insane in that finals. I think Masu is the guy here. I think the conversation here against Hans Sama, in my opinion, like we have these three guys left. It's like Hans Sama, maybe in the context of what I said before, maybe I'm gonna put Hans Sama above. Because I do think that Hans Sama, as a player profile, is more similar to Gumayushi. And I do think that being able to play strong lanes, being strong bot lane, getting first dragons, getting momentum in the game matters super, super much. Hans Sama is really, really good at that. So I might have to put Hans Sama above Masu. But I think Masu has a wider range of play. I do think that I would trust Masu if it goes a little bit deeper. But Hans Sama also has, you know, decent international experience. We had that LDR incident, but beyond that, I think it was pretty damn solid. I think that this is somewhere where we land. Super, fantastic player performance. I think he's ramping up, looking super, super good. But I think that I would have to put the other homies above him currently. Because I do think that, these three guys are tough, man. It's tough. Hassan was so quiet in the finals, but I don't know. I feel like that finals, in my mind, I think it has to be this way, guys. I think it has to be this way. I think Hans Sama, in the context of the current meta, I do think that his way of playing really fits, right? His he's leaning towards more lane heavy ADCs. I do think that that's something that's going to be good for him, right? In terms of laning, I think it's going to be good for him. Support. Let's move to support. For me, Keria. Mickey is obviously not at this tournament, so Keria is going to be awarded the #1 spot. Keria, just in terms of individual ceiling, I think what Chovy is for mid, Keria is for support. I think he does shit that nobody else does. I think, like, in regards to this finals that they played against How I keep calling it finals. I guess there was a finality to it because it was the final game. Keria on Poppy. I mentioned already on the owner conversation. It's like Keria and owner are working together, so Keria actually can play melee champions and melee supports and be allowed to perform like a beast. He plays the range supports better than anybody. He plays the engaged supports absolutely insane. I think Keria, you know, the weakest points of his play in this split was when he overcooked. There was like that one series against How Alive where he picked Elise and Pantheon support and just looked like a joke. But that's just what it is, right? I think it's easy to look at T1 and say, whoa, look how good they are now. I think Keria and owner really, really kept them intact and kept them in the contention for playoffs when they were dropping games against really, really bad teams in the context of comparison to T1. I think Keria is just a demon. I think that Keria is making more and more arguments for being the greatest supports of all time. I think that he already has a very, very solid argument. I think in terms of reshaping the role, it's like people talk about how Mata reshaped the role. Keria has also reshaped the role in a modern game, which is absolutely insane. And then there's, of course, Meiko's longevity that is really, really impressive. But beyond these three in the conversation, there's nobody. And Keria, like, as recent as his last best of 5 play, he did shit that I don't think any other super will do. Just watch his Poppy engages, watch his Rakan angles. Absolutely nasty. Nasty. And I think that Mata, together with Keria and Owner, they're finally putting in the missing piece that enables them to play melee supports. It was never a mechanical thing. Never a mechanical thing. It was a team play thing. And finding timings together. And they do so. So I'm not worried, regardless of what Keria locks in. And I think that's insanely dangerous for any team that faces up against him. Kael, son of Superman. Kael, Tarzan and Kael. What a damn good engine. I think in terms of pure support jungle synergy play, I think they are by far the best in this competition. And I think that makes them a very, very formidable competitor. Very formidable competitor. I think Kael and Tarzan, in terms of tracking tempo, being on time, tracking camps, team fighting, and also range of play, and also laning, I think that Kael is just brilliant. Kael is really, really good. Kael coming into his first international, you know, Tabe has managed to, you know, make an LPL winning roster out of this Anyone's Legend team is not something that anyone could see coming, right? I think it's insanely impressive considering the competition that he's up against. I think Kael is a phenomenal player. And I do think that no one held a candle to how good Tarzan and Kael played together this time around. And Kael is just a very complete jungler. He doesn't have that same level of crazy flair like Keria, but Tarzan and Kael, for those who didn't watch LPL, I think they basically do what Alvaro and Elioya do, but at a higher level against better players. They are extremely, extremely good at playing the game together, and I think that you know, this is something to watch out for. Kael is my number two guy here. Now it's a question of, you know, Duro. Duro, I do think that in terms of, if I look at the entirety of, you know, the spring split, I would put Duro's performance over maybe Keria. Maybe. Because I do think that Keria's peaks still are there. They are there. They are straight up there. And I don't think that, you know, Keria should be the victim of the turmoil in terms of, you know, judging him as a player, because I was watching those games and individually Keria was performing. He was fucking performing. Most of the time, in my opinion, when it came to T1's underperformance, it was either Doran figuring his stuff out, the Gumayushi Smash situation where Gumayushi was underperforming and then Smash was subbed in and so forth, and on occasion also Faker underperforming. I don't put that necessarily on Keria, right? I think Duro had a fantastic split, and if I made an all-pro, probably I would put Duro above Keria, but I'm looking at it in the context of this competition. And now if we're competing for the third spot, on last Worlds is hard to shake off. Hard to shake off. And the earlier parts of the split also hard to shake off. But on in the run up to, of course, the finals, I think the best of fives, on really, really smurfed it. Like really, really played good. And now it's a question of experience versus lack of experience. That's where it comes through. But also On's experience outside of course, you know, that Worlds that I mentioned has been pretty damn good. You know, his MSIs were good. His Worlds run with Billy back in 23 with a beat Genji was still a massive one. I don't want to put too much weight only on that World Championship because On carries a lot of experience and Duro is coming into this quite fresh, right? So it's one of those situations similar to Hope where I agree that Duro has had a fantastic split. And I think this is just a question of your flavors. But I do think that On the experience actually matters here. And I do think there's a lot of pressure here that Duro needs to manage, especially in the conversation of them coming in as favorites, right? Them coming in as favorites. Even now, when I'm looking at it, like I think there's a world where I'm going to put Hope above Ruler. Yeah, that's the thing with tier lists, bro. You can wake up and you can feel differently about certain details and you change it up. But I think this will be my angle here. I put Elkin On here, and I think that's pretty much the angle. Next in line, Alvaro. I think it speaks for itself. I've already mentioned so much about Elioya and Alvaro and the jungle support synergy that it matters. Now Labrov versus Busio. I think Labrov is like a decent laner. I think Busio was very, very disappointing at times in terms of his consistency. I think that he did a lot of the similar things that pained me about Whippo in particular. But I do think in terms of understanding macro and playing the map and being in tune with game ideas, Busio is better than Labrov. And I do think that Labrov, when it comes to like, his international experience, him already having troubles in LEC finals, I don't know how he's going to manage. So I'm going to put Busio above Labrov. Let me just double check everything. Ruler versus Hope for me is Ruler versus Hope. Oh, it's tough. It's tough. Here I can negotiate, guys. Let me know in the comments below who is above, Ruler or Hope. This is definitely negotiable for me. At this point, I am so out of gas, out of steam. I think the next video we're going to do is going to be related to how I believe the teams are going to perform as a whole. A team tier list and a discussion about how strong the teams, I believe, will be. And then, of course, maybe we talk about the coaches, maybe the potential meta. And then we rock and roll as per usual. Thank you very much for watching till the end. I wish you all the best, and I'll catch you on the Flippity Flip. I repeat, this is my own biased tier list, and you can comment on it however you want. And I welcome that discussion, because that is what is fun about it. So I'll catch you there. See you.